is an Unspoiled Network podcast.
This is Spoil Me, covering Blackflame Chapters 17 and 18. In these chapters, it turns out Ethan did not see any of this coming, which has me a little bit shook, to be honest. And Orthos comes out with some heavy hitting. Welcome to Spoil Me. Welcome to the show, everyone. I am Natasha. Thank you very much to Andy for commissioning this episode. I have one episode of coverage left, and then I will be moving into book 4, which I think is called Skysworn, which I'm pretty stoked that it's called that because they have been brought up a few times now, and I'm just dying to know what the deal is with them, so that's pretty cool. Y'all, these chapters, they go really hard. Things are popping off in a way that I was not prepared for. So, a couple things. First of all, I want to address that somehow I missed that at the end of the previous chapter, we actually... The author is doing something a little unusual here, so I share a little of the blame with him, I think. But I missed the fact that that Lindon and Yerin actually passed the striker trial in the last chapter. It's mentioned in such an offhand, sort of casual way. And it's, in the way that the first trial also went, this author has chosen not to show us, like, the moment that they really... There's not like that moment of victory that we get to see. It's just getting to hear about it after the fact instead. We see the work that leads up to it and the method by which they managed to secure their victory, but we don't actually follow them all the way to the end and see that, which I think is really interesting. Part of me kind of likes it because it is it what's the word I want? Subverts expectations, I guess. But also I do miss having like a fist pump in the air, like good for them sort of moment. And it's mentioned so casually. It's not even from their POV. It's mentioned from Cassius's POV. And he's just like, oh, look, they did it for them. It only took them 10 days this time. Now on to the good shit. And because it's just so casually mentioned, I just completely missed it. So when the next section, when they're already beginning on the ruler trial, I was like, wait, what? Did they just like beat it without it even being mentioned? And it was mentioned, but barely. Which, like I said, it's kind of interesting for it to be like such a major deal for them to get through these trials, but then it to also be sort of incidental to things. And I kind of like it. I kind of find it confusing, but I'm okay with being confused. That's not a deal breaker for me. So I don't know. So anyway, this chapter begins with Ethan. Ethan, to summarize, feels like a punk. Ethan immediately, when he sees all of this Madra flying into the air, he knows precisely what it is right away. And I'm going to read this little bit here. Let's see. He felt so blind. The Jai clan had played him perfectly. They had continued to work against the Aurelius family even when they knew he was watching. If they had pretended to cooperate while he was in the city, he would have known they were biding their time. But they had been forced to back off because of Jai Long, and because of his own actions against them, subtle though they had been. Ethan had been sure he was winning the game right up until his opponent swept the cards off the table and stabbed him. And that is... I'm going to deviate talking about the book for just a second, but I hope y'all will bear with me. I think a lot of us who are American in the year 2020 feel this way, where we all believed that there was a certain set of rules that we had agreed as a society that we were going to abide by. And there is no necessary reason why anybody has to follow these rules other than it is traditional. It is understood to be a morally supportable way to behave. It seems like this is what the public expects. And so we all sort of thought this is just how it is. And then people began to play outside the rule book, and we began to realize as a country that what we had taken for a long time to be hard and fast rules were in fact only traditions. They were only an expectation based on previous precedent being set, but they were not rules. And even if they were, the only way to enforce a rule is to have anybody willing to do the enforcing. And in order to be able to enforce a rule, you need to have any power at all of any kind. And I think it's been a real rude awakening for a lot of us as we've realized we had been playing by the rules, thinking that was what everyone was doing. And to find out that's not at all how a huge segment of the population was choosing to operate, we find ourselves feeling like children out here, reading the signs, listening to our elders telling us the thing, when in fact somebody else is coming out way ahead by not doing any of that and then turning around and giving us all the finger. And this is part of the problem as well with capitalism in general, is that it also thrives off people not following rules or having a conscience. You do a lot better as a capitalist if you don't care about people and if you don't prioritize other people. That's just good for business. There's no getting around that. And when you are somebody who hasn't figured that out yet, you still think, okay, there's an established way of doing things, and we all know that, well, we at least need to pay our people enough to get by. We need to pay them enough that, we need to be able to provide certain benefits. And somebody along the way was like, but do we though? Do we really? And they just didn't. And other capitalists began to realize, oh, they didn't do it and they're still okay. If we all do it, nobody's going to have any choice but to keep working for us bastards. So why don't we just all stop doing it? And gradually, even companies that didn't really want to do it saw their profits getting eaten into because they were the only ones who had stayed giving benefits and full-time hours. And they eventually felt like they were backed into a corner and had to stop in order to keep up with other companies that had already thrown in their lot. So basically what I'm saying is that Ethan is in this position now where he had been operating thinking that they all had this agreement on what was seemly and honorable and decent. And they were going to jockey for leverage politically. But I don't think he ever realized that they were planning to straight up just murder an entire clan of people. And it should be mentioned that it's stated a couple of times, both in this section and the previous one, and I had meant to say something about it last episode and forgot. It's mentioned that Ethan and Cassius are the only remaining original members of the Aurelius clan. They're the only ones of the blood. Everybody else has been sort of adopted into the clan, I guess. And so the fact that Ethan and Cassius were gone meant that whatever that ability is that is in the Aurelius blood that allows them to have a sense of what's happening, the two of them being out of the city was exactly the opportunity that Jai Daishou was looking for. And Ethan is just really like suffering in this moment because his huge amount of awareness, his ability, means that he absolutely feels every scream, every moment of begging for mercy, every death, every bit of pain. He senses and sees and feels all of it. And it is really awful for him. And he starts to really get afraid at the same time, not simply for these people that are being attacked at the moment, but this realization that he got so thoroughly played means that anything is on the table now. If they played him here, how else have they played him? It's sort of, it's a possibility that he can't just turn away from. It is absolutely a potential reality that they have organized something else, and he missed that too. And as you and I, the reader, know, that's true, because this seems like it's just being, all of this is just being perpetrated against the Aurelius family out in the streets in a sort of general way. But again, he's operating under this assumption that he and Jai Long had this gentleman's agreement about how they were going to wait a year. And he really had full confidence that Jai Long would obey and honor that agreement, not realizing that whether Jai Long is honorable enough isn't the issue. Jai Long has now been conscripted, basically, by, is it Jai Daishou or Daishou? I'll get there in a second. I'll find out again. But I don't even think it's occurred to Ethan quite yet that they are going after Lindon and Yerin yet. I think it might come to him shortly after, but he gets pretty sidetracked here. So his Madra spun the hollow armor through his whole body. It wasn't the best enforcer technique, his not being the best enforcer path, but combined with an underlord's body, the fall wouldn't hurt him. It would shatter the street, though. So instead, he grabbed a windowsill for an instant as he passed, then kicked off the wall, slowed himself for a second on the edge of a nearby roof, snagged a tree branch, and landed without breaking anything. A few loose leaves fluttered to the ground behind him, and he swept his sleeves so that the wind carried them into a nearby trash box. Guys, look. This man is just so insufferable. And by insufferable, I mean excellent. Because even in the midst of this fucking emergency, flat out emergency crisis situation, he is still out here being like, well, I'm not going to create extra work for my people. So I'm not going to break the street. And I'm not going to leave leaves around. God fucking forbid. You know, I'm not even mad about it. So he looks over and there are two servants who are wearing their best clothing. And it's clear they were out on a date together, and they are being hassled by a couple of Jai Highgolds. And I really enjoy everybody freezing when they see Ethan. He pulls a pin from this woman's hair, tells her the Aurelius family will reimburse you for this, and then hurls it over his shoulder right through one of the Highgolds' throats. I love this so much. It's just everything about it. It's being just a pin. The fact that he's able to hurl it hard enough that it goes through someone's throat. And that he makes sure to tell her she'll be reimbursed for it. This is the kind of thing that I want to see. And this is like, you know, a post-credit sequence where eventually you see everybody making their insurance claims against the Aurelius family at the end of the episode. Like, I want to see the moment where she shows up at the doors of his household and is like, hey, I'm going to need that money you promised me, by the way. You said, so I want it. So he tells them to ring the alarm bells, and he sends a wisp of Madra flowing into the other the hairpin again, and throws it. It blasted through the spirit like a ballista bolt, through the remnant that began to arise. I love it so much. The 6 Jai clan True Gold elders who had placed the formation flags waited for him just on the other side of the barrier. He'd felt them pacing him, but he had expected them to provide backup for Jai Daishou in the fight between the underlords. Now he realized they were meant to keep him in one place until their patriarch came to join them. Half a dozen old men were feeling very proud of themselves right now, but they watched him from beyond the boundary formation like mice watching a trapped hawk. So his section here ends with him telling them that this is a mistake, and then we go back to Cassius. I find Cassius in this section to be very compelling. I have liked him as a character from the beginning. I think that he sounds like he's a person who, he obviously has some really strong morals and ideas of how things should be done, which I'm always kind of a fan of those characters when we are in the midst of sort of a lawless world. There's a real comfort to that. And I also like the fact that, like, there has been this odd development with him running the trials for Yerin and Lindon, that he went into it feeling really upset with Ethan for setting up something that he thought was, like, just punishment, just sheer, like, murder, almost. And now it's turned around where he's not only enjoying running them, but he's planning to do his best to keep them from winning, actively stopping them from winning. It's a fun development, and it adds an extra aspect of personality to him that I think is very crucial to make him... It keeps him from being too one-dimensional, too much of just a solid good guy who wants the best for everyone. No, he has a streak of pride. He has a streak of almost mischievousness a little bit. Competitiveness, you know? And then when we get into this section, he's watching the two of them when this whole thing begins to pop off. This is where he notices the spear Madra taking the place of the sun as the sun goes down. Now, I'm not sure that Andy can answer this for me right now or not, but I'm curious about the spear Madra and how that works, because the end of the last chapter, we've got Jai Daishou holding up the spear, and it says all around the city, Stellar Spear Madra flared to life. What does that look like? Is there just like flares of light in random places? Is it flares of light around spears? Do the spears themselves glow, or is it just the aura around the spears that glows? And I'm assuming that is the signal. That's why everything begins to pop off. How is it that he's able to send that Madra outward from the ancestor spear? How did he do it? And is that something that was like, that Jailong was aware was doable? I don't know if that dilutes the power of the ancestor spear at all, or if this is just another aspect. Like, because Jailong's plan was to avenge himself and then eventually avenge Kral. But that wasn't that. None of that plan particularly included sharing power. It was all about collecting as much power for himself as he could, so that he could just like tear through the Jai clan and then tear through Lindon. So even if it had been possible and Jailong knew it was, I don't expect that he would have thought about that because it wasn't part of his own plan. Andy says, I think it's referring to striker techniques they use. They're projecting bright white Madra. It throws off a lot of light as a byproduct. It's not created by the weapon, so they can do it with a regular spear or the ancestor's spear. Oh. Okay. So if it's not created by the weapon, I guess I thought that it was, because the spear seems like it stores so much Madra because it like draws Madra out of people. Okay. So this is like when Cassius first feels this, he gets a little bit alarmed, but his initial reaction is really like, probably this is just the Jai clan finally dealing with Jai Long. But then he hears somebody screaming, I'm not Aurelius, I don't work for them, please. And then a door shatters and a Jai True Gold comes in, like through this like busted door. And he begins to like lose his cool for a second and thinks about his wife and son. And this adds another really wonderful bit of character to him, because we've known how much he loves his wife and son. They were his first thought when we joined him as a character in the first place. His first POV chapter starts with him wondering about his family. And here, he is so distracted about whether or not they're okay that he doesn't even engage in the fight at all until he has established to his own satisfaction that they are both okay. He is almost not participating and just letting himself get beat on for a second until he is able to pin down their location and where they are and what they're doing. So I find that to be really interesting. I just deeply enjoy somebody who cares so much about their own family that there's not even a moment of having to consider what to do next. He doesn't have to think about it. He just goes, where are they? And that's his like just gut level instinctual reaction to danger is find them, make sure they're all right. And I will talk about them a little bit later, but for right now, he is searching for that and still hasn't found them. And as he is, I love this part here, his silver steps carried him down into the streets, which were already choked with combat. He rushed past Aurelius' servants defending themselves with swords and spears, with claws of ice and arrows of fire. He ignored whips of blood and slipped around toxic mists. Whips of blood. That's messed up. I'm just saying. It wasn't just Aurelius family members dying tonight. The Jai clan were reclaiming their territory with ruthless efficiency. They targeted those in Aurelius colors, but anyone who got in their way or resisted or looked like the slightest threat, they were blasted apart by regimented ranks wielding white light. Only the Red Flower family was untouched, as expected. A pair of Jai clansmen escorted a group with flowers on their chests away from the chaos of the battle. The red flowers grew food for the Empire, and if one of them died, the Sky Sworn would come down on the Jai clan like a hammer. His wife's family should be exempt too. If a nooooo were caught in the crossfire, the Emperor would make the Jai clan pay for it. But he could see the red flowers, safe and escorted away by Jai warriors. He couldn't see anyone with the green wings of the nooooo family's path of the grasping sky. Until he saw Jing, he couldn't relax. So, all kinds of information here. Finding out that the red flowers are farmers, it sounds like. The ones maybe operating those huge greenhouses that we saw. And as he is still mentally searching for his wife and child, 3 high golds begin to close in on him. And it says 6 more were spearing a true gold remnant to death nearby. That explained why so many of the Jai clan's mid-level fighters were together. That couldn't have been an Aurelius remnant. None of their true golds were in the city. Someone had tried to intervene. I'm very curious about that. I don't know if that is going to be significant at all, but it got my attention and it made me a little bit nervous, I gotta say. So, 9 high golds are up against him, And one of them, like, bashes him to break the technique with, like, this light. And they talk about him and try to figure out who he is. And he looks up and recognizes the woman who's talking. And she's supposed to be the 256th strongest high gold in the Empire. She was a strong opponent. And he, like, says something to her eventually about how he's surprised she didn't recognize him. And it's a very good moment, but we'll get there. Let's see. Cassius, breathing sped up because he still hadn't found his wife. The ringing in his head had sharpened to a scream. He poured all his Madra into his detection web, scanning the tower from top to bottom, racing to see that his family was safe. Then he saw her. She wasn't in their rooms, but at the base of the tower, on her way to a shelter with more Aurelius family employees. Black hair streamed behind her, and her left eye was dark and furious. Her right was an orange globe of Madra, a construct to replace one she'd lost in battle years ago. Her wings spread, one the natural emerald gold sign of her path, and the other a matrix of sunset-colored energy, her second prosthetic. This bitch sounds badass as all hell. I want to know about Jing really, really bad. Can I just say that? I mean, what? Oh. He says earlier that she's stronger than him. Like, he isn't ashamed of that at all. He's very strong. But she is past him even. And I love this so much. So as soon as he knows they're okay, his brain snaps back into focus. He thrusts his palm into Jaiu's spear, sending a pulse of Madra and slicing it in half. Jaiu, I'm disappointed you didn't recognize me. Her face paled. White lines began creeping over her skin as she prepared her flowing starlight technique. I'm sorry, we thought you were... She swallowed, then yelled, "Run! Everyone, run!" What is it? It's Silver Step. The technique rang like a bell under his foot, launching him behind Jaiu. He drove his hand into her back, and silver light pierced her heart. Another silver step, and he stood beside the Jai clan high gold who had asked the question. Cassius hadn't bothered picking up his sword. The spearhead pointed in his direction, quivering. Number 2. Cassius placed a palm on the man's head, and sword Madra blasted through his skull and into his brain. He died instantly. 9 high golds would have been too much of an opponent, even for him, if they had cooperated. But splitting up and coming at him one at a time. There was only one high gold in the Blackflame Empire who could fight with him face to face, and she was carrying their child into a shelter. nooooo Cassius Aurelius, former heir of the Aurelius family, had been allowed to marry into the nooooo clan for 3 reasons. First, the recommendation of his family underlord. Second, the personal feelings of nooooo Jing, star of the clan's young generation. And third, his personal strength. Cassius's bae. I like it. I like how strong he is. I just like strength. I like how devoted he is. It just makes my heart go pitter-pat. I love how incredibly badass and ruthless he is here. It is a joy to behold. And I'm just so here for this entire scene. Another silver step, he sent a head spinning onto the street. 6 more steps later, he was out of Madra, and there were 6 more bloodstains on the streets. Of all the high golds who had tried to ambush the second-ranked high gold in the Empire, none remained. I'm like one of those girls when Gaston walks by. We have a little bit of Fisher Gesha. And I like really appreciated this moment because I won't lie. She has this, like, when he mentioned somebody had tried to intervene and they were killing the remnant, I had a flash of like, oh my God, I hope it's not Fisher Gesha and we don't find out about it later. And I don't think it is. I don't even remember. Is she a high gold or is she a low gold or a true gold? Is she a high gold? But in any case, she's talking to herself about how stupid it was for her to come here. This was a bad idea. Oh, you had to go and see the Empire, didn't you? You had to go. And honestly, it's really funny. There are so many moments in my life where I have felt like this. And what she does is basically she webs herself to the ceiling and waits for this shit to like be over and just hides. And I ain't mad at her for that even a little bit. That seems like a smart way to handle this shit. She's not really involved, you know, like I'm fine with it. So then we go back to Jai Long and Gokren. And they are reaching the area where the trial is. And Jai Long is thinking about how Jai Daishou, I think it's Daishou, like his decision to ignore the agreement that was between the families and waiting a year is maybe going to like be a little bit of a hit against his honor, but really it's not going to be a big deal when all is said and done and the dust settles. People are probably not even going to think about it too much. And Jai Long tells Gokren that he wants to handle Yerin and Gokren can handle Lindon. It says the sword artist could live, but he didn't want Lindon sneaking off. Besides, she had traded blows with him before, even a full stage behind him. Her advancement could not have kept pace with his. He wanted to see how much stronger he'd become in the past half year. So he's using her as a bit of a, like, yardstick for himself, which is on the one hand understandable, and on the other hand, I'm just like, oh, you're so gross. I hate you. Like, you can't help but want to do that when you're going up against an enemy after you've been doing something really serious to try and advance yourself. But in the way that he talks about her, I just, he irritates me. So they are waiting as Jai Long sits down and cycles aura so that he can begin to, launch his attack. And then we go inside back to Lindon and Yerin, who are still blissfully unaware that anything is happening. And he is examining the ruler trial tablet, reading about how the black flame is supposed to like erode your soul, destroy your sanity, advancement, and lifespan. And it's really kind of amazing how he has to keep reminding himself the cost of this weapon and how the like grimness of it just keeps on being a bit of a shock as he is reminded, like, you have to pay a price for this fucking power, my friend. This doesn't come free. And it says he'd chosen this path for its ability to win duels, not for its outstanding moral values. And he'd wanted the biggest weapon he could find if he had to fight the creature destined to attack Sacred Valley. So they are looking at the ruler trial, and it turns out that there are 99 figures, which each seems to have a different weapon and a different madra coming off of all of them, arranged in a circle. The activation crystal was on a pedestal in the center, and Lindon had to use his ruler technique to some degree before he could power the course. He wasn't looking forward to it. The striker trial had only taken them 10 days to pass, but based on how long it had taken him to fight 18 dummies, almost 100 would take very probably the rest of his short life. So he is going over to the technique section, and it takes a while before he remembers what Orthos had said to him about the void dragon. Let's see, I'm trying to find the spot. Where is it that he said? Oh, right, here it is. Void dragon dance. Dragon's dance. And Yerin is like, oh, nice. That is a good name. Go with that. Yes, sir, I like it. And this is when they get sort of distracted by this flash of light. They both sort of look up. And he's used to light like this. He's like us with fireworks, where he's like, oh, are they having a festival or something? Like, what's going on? And Yerin puts her attention out for just a moment. And then goes, okay, you need to get your pack. And we need to put our backs to an exit. And he's like, why? What's going on? And she's like, I'm not sure, but it is not a fucking festival. So let's get moving. And as he's like about to go and grab his pack, all of a sudden he senses Orthos's core, which feels like it is about to blow. And I think they both maybe get distracted by that and believe that maybe that's all they sense. Like, I don't know, because we're not in Yerin's head, but it feels to me like Lindon believes Orthos was the main threat that they both sensed at the same time. Whether or not that's really what they thought winds up being irrelevant, because they have barely dealt with him and gotten away from him when the others come inside. So we don't ever really see the result of that. But I got the feeling that they sort of thought Orthos was like what they had been feeling. And I like when Yerin asks Lindon, is that your turtle buddy? Lindon says, not at the moment, which is just such a sort of poignant line. Like, no, that's not really him right now. And I just felt so bad. I really do. And Orthos comes in and attacks them. I maintain, because I really want to be Team Orthos, that Orthos is reacting to the feeling of the Stellar Spear Madra flying around. And he knows some shit is up, and he knows it's his job to defend the Aurelius clan, but he isn't clear enough in his mind to tell who the enemy is. So he just goes at them because they're the closest, and he needs to fight somebody, and he can tell that that's like, you know, what he should be doing, but he just doesn't direct it in the right place. So they wind up like going back and forth, and like all that Lindon can think is that if he went and got the Sylvan River seed, he might be able to use that to clean Orthos's like Modric channels. And you know, it says the pack was all the way in the cave, and by the time he returned, Yerin could be dead. He could try to lure Orthos out to the exit. He could probably get the turtle to follow him, and then Yerin could knock him through the aura barrier to the outside. And he thinks to himself that maybe if he could do this like if he can use the half silver dagger, that he has in the waistband of his, or like, I'm trying to find the spot. It doesn't matter, but he's holding it on him. If he could stab Orthos at all, the half silver would disperse his Madra, and Yerin would have an instant to stop him. It might even be enough to relieve the pressure on his spirit and make him sane again. And he tries it, and the half silver blade just snaps. And Lindon fucking realizes, like, this turtle has a thick ass shell. Its skin is like solid leather, and half silver is really brittle, and he should have known that that's what was going to happen. And we cut from there to Yerin's point of view, which is really fun, actually, because seeing Lindon's progress from her eyes is just a little bit more meaningful. Like, we get a certain idea of things from him, but because he's so limited in his experience, it's hard to know how much credence to give Lindon being impressed with something, you know? And whenever we get to go into Yerin's head and she's like, oh, damn, that's pretty good. I'm like, all right, well, then it really must be because she knows. I mean, you know. So here we have her master's voice was really starting to scrape her nerves. She'd learned so much from the instincts bubbling up from his remnant that she couldn't believe Ethan had ever told her to get rid of him. But now he was starting to feel like a burden. Her gold sign twitched like her master wanted her to cut the turtle in half. Well, that would be just fine if it weren't a turtle. There was a big mound of shell in the way. The sword sage didn't see the problem. That was a stable enough move. If it were him in the flesh, he could cut a mountain in half without even a sword in his hand. But she was still a gold, 10 leagues and 2 oceans behind his stage of advancement. She couldn't cut through that shell if Orthos stood quietly and let her, but her gold sign was still pulling her to try it. If not for Lindon, she'd be dead already. And I love that. I feel that might be the first time in the series where she's ever thought that. She just keeps on being low-key impressed. Like, the Ironforged body is just super helpful. And it says, let's see, he was faltering. It was plain to see if she didn't win this fight in the next 2 breaths, he wouldn't get a third. So she hurls her way into there and sinks her, let's see, she hurls her sword at Orthos. It's stuck into the earth beneath the turtle, buried up to the hill, and Orthos didn't notice. Yerin gathered all the sword aura she could pull into her gold sign, and even the edge of her fingernails. Sword aura showed its power in motion. When she swung them all forward, she struck with the endless sword technique. Her gold sign rang like a bell. Her fingernails echoed tiny chimes as they popped and sprayed blood into the air. Can I just say, absolutely fucking not? Absolutely fucking not, guys. Y'all, 2 days ago, when I was unloading my dishwasher, I reached a little too quickly down towards the utensil basket, and I jammed the tine of a fork up under my fingernail. So hard that it began to bleed. And that shit still hurts. Very badly. And it was just the one thing for an instant 2 days ago. I don't know what he means when he says popped. I don't know if he means her fingernails came out of her fingertips. I don't really care. You just don't do that. I don't like it. I have to say that I do think it was merciful to not include her teeth in this whole thing, because that could also have been horrifying. But I hated it. I'm just saying. I just needed to say it. Sword aura burst out of the buried weapon, a wave of dirt spraying everywhere, and blasted the turtle's underbelly. She had been hoping to split Orthos from top to bottom, but she could feel when the aura didn't bite. It slammed into his belly, lifting him 6 inches off the ground and making him roar, but it barely cut him. She'd gotten worse from sharp twigs. And at this point, she sees another opening, but she's too far to, do anything about it. And she's about to yell to Lindon to let him know when he sees it and takes advantage of it. And for a second, she's like, oh, fuck, yes, this fucking dude gets it. We are in sync right now. I love it. She throws her sword to him. He catches it in midair. He's about to pull his sword on this. And then he switches cores. All of a sudden, his presence went from a fiercely burning fire to a calm, almost invisible lake. He was a jade, on a different path. And before he killed the sacred beast, something caught her attention. When did he have full strength in both his cores. So, this is something that I had been asking about. I still don't really get it. I don't know if I should get it. But I had been saying I didn't really understand the leveling up situation and how he could reach Jade but still be copper in one core or be, iron in the other core. I didn't really understand how that was working. But evidently, he's Jade in both cores. And now she's like, I don't understand how he could be doing that. And she realizes it has to be the cycling technique that Ethan taught him. And she's feeling a little bit of a way about that because she had really been feeling that Ethan wasn't treating the two of them like actual disciples. And so she took it for granted that Ethan, if he was teaching Lindon anything, it was something somewhat minor because Lindon was so far behind that what would be the point of teaching him something really incredible when he's just not at a certain level to be able to do some of that stuff yet. And, you and I know from the conversation with Cassius, I'm pretty certain he said that the technique Lindon's been using for cycling is supposed to be for low gold. Maybe high gold. It was definitely a gold technique, though. And Lindon doesn't know that. He was just given this incredibly difficult fucking technique and has been employing it unaware that this really should be outside of what he's able to do. And she says, what if Ethan was actually passing along his sacred arts to Lindon? Because if that cycling technique had made up for his lack of Madra, it wasn't some half-baked technique that Lindon had found in an old scroll. It was on the same stage as the cycling technique her master had passed to her. She expected a fresh surge of envy, but what passed through her instead was relief. A large slice of a sacred artist's future could be told from the quality of their path. You could get to true gold without a perfect iron body, but then your flesh wouldn't survive the advancement to Underlord. Same story for spirits. Without a solid jade cycling technique, your soul would get shakier and shakier at each stage until you couldn't advance any further. The more solid your foundation, the further you could go. When Ethan told them he wanted to take them all the way to the end, he hadn't just been spitting in the wind. So I want to know when she says, without a solid jade cycling technique, your soul would get shakier and shakier. I want to know what that looks like. Your body, I can understand. We've already seen Lindon jump in a way that hurts his knees because it's too powerful for his body and he hasn't gotten used to it yet. But in terms of like your soul, that's different. I want to know what that is. So she is watching Lindon about to like win and take Orthos out and is so excited and feeling like this dude's really come a long way. And then he throws the blade aside and she just stares at him and she's like, what the fuck are you fucking doing? And he says, Orthos doesn't deserve to die here and the Sylvan might help him. To which she's like, okay, I'm not even arguing that you're not right about that, but he is going to kill us and he is an enemy right now and you need to fucking kill him. I'm not saying to do it because it's fun. I'm saying we are gonna die if you don't. And he doesn't pick the sword back up. He goes after his pack. And she loses her temper and goes and grabs her sword and is like, listen, if you're not going to do it, I'm going to fucking do it. And she goes up to Orthos and she has her fucking Madra gathered for the sword and looks down at Orthos, and all of a sudden she realizes that Orthos's face is different and he doesn't look enraged or furious. He looks lost and sad. And he says, do what you must. And she has to sheath the sword again. She can't do it. And she runs back to Lindon and says, not even an enemy really, is he? And he says, I never thought so. No. She asks, the path makes him crazy? And he says, his mind can't compete with the feelings in his spirit. That's the impression I get. And she says, if it happens to you, I will cut your head off. And I was like, yeah, I mean, I feel like Lindon would kind of want that. I'm not mad about that at all. So they go and track down Little Blue, who is not in her case anymore. It says they're chasing her around the cave and they have to scoop her back into the tank. And when they returned and found Orthos gone, he tucked the Sylvan away as though he'd expected as much, and she breathed a sigh of relief. And he says, I don't think that we can clear the ruler trial now because, you know, this is really getting a little bit too tight here with this thing running around. He asks, do you think that Ethan will understand us leaving early? And she's essentially like, man, if he doesn't, I don't really know what to tell you because that's ridiculous. Like, there's a crazed sacred beast down here and I can feel things bursting out into a war zone out there. I don't know if Lindon can sense that yet, but she can sense it. And as they come out, she realizes for real how serious the war is that's broken out down there. Lindon looked horrified, clutching the jade badge. Oh, excuse me. Yerin loosed her own grip on her sword. Ethan's not in the city, she said. How can you be sure? This wouldn't be happening. There'd be heaps of dead Jai clansmen piled up all over the city. It's so tragic. This, and there's something that Cassius thinks to himself earlier about how glad he is that Ethan's out there dealing with the Jai clan because he knows he doesn't have anything to worry about. And the absolute faith the two of them have in Ethan, and to just realize that, like, he's been so completely taken by surprise here, and they just don't know that. And Lindon says, well, let's go back through the trials, and we can circle around and come out in the back of the territory. And she says, we should just head out to the capital. And Lyndon's like, I don't think Ethan would like that. And she's about to sort of be like, well, you know, he's not going to find us. And then she stops and is like, of course he'll fucking find us. What am I talking about? And she's like, look, I understand your feelings on this, but honestly, we haven't been with the Aurelius family that long, and they haven't given us enough that I feel an obligation to them. And Lindon is like, dude, we really should go back to the trials. And she starts to argue about Orthos being in there, and they get attacked all of a sudden. And Jai Long rolls up. And I love this. She can sense his advancement. And it says, last time she'd seen him, his spirit had felt deadly, but contained, like a sheathed sword. Now, the sheath had been removed. Not only was he true gold as well, with powers that pressed against her senses, he felt dangerous, like he'd cut her just by standing near. And I think that's a pretty neat concept. You know, the idea that just like, he's like an open flame. You just want to back off, you know? So this fight begins, and she's fucking tired. She has got nothing left in her core, and this is just not the time, man. But she's got to do it. And he tells her, I wish that you had let me know that you were of the Aurelius clan, because I wouldn't have fought you last time. And she's like, well, that's sort of new. But, you know, if you wanted to drop your weapons, I could show mercy. I really do enjoy it. And at this point, both Jai Long and the Sand Viper that's with him, who I think is Gokran, they shift their attention to Lindon for just an instant, and this gives her the opening to attack. She kicked Lindon in the chest, sending him back into the tunnel and closer to the trial. A Sand Viper technique shattered into green light on the bare rock where Lindon had been standing, and the gray-haired man was dashing past her, a frustrated growl turning into a shout as he ran. Yeah, that's Gokran. So Jai Daishou, patriarch of the Jai clan, stared through the bubble of aura at the blurred figure with the yellow hair and blurred robes. Real quick, I'm going to just wrap up what's going on so far with Lindon and Gokren. Because Gokren basically attacks Lindon with everything he's got, and Lindon crumples almost immediately. And there's this rage coming from Gokren, which I think is a combination of this being the kid who killed his son, and the fact that Lindon's not putting up any sort of fight. So it's making him even more upset to realize somehow this piece of shit nothing kid who has no ability took his son's life. Like, it's just an insult, you know? He's just beside himself. And so he doesn't notice Orthos coming at him. And Orthos just hits him like a fucking linebacker. And it was just such a great moment to me. Like, it was nice for... It felt almost like a Greek myth a little bit, you know? Lindon tries to grant mercy to this creature, and in so doing, earns himself an ally who turns around and saves his ass a little bit later. And I really appreciated it. I liked it. It was just sort of... I need Orthos to get a win, like a real win. And I'm worried he's going to die here. And I don't want that. But I'm glad that he got to defend, because that's clearly what he wants to do. That's his impulse. So, okay. Back to Jai Daishou and Ethan. So, Ethan is standing there in this, like, boundary, and he's got his broom, and Jai Daishou keeps trying to be like, is that a weapon? Is that anything? Is that a construct? But he keeps feeling like, no, I think it's literally just a broom. And he says, speak like a grown man for once in your life, and perhaps we can come to an accord. And Ethan doesn't answer him. And this dude is really starting to get irritated at Ethan's, like, being above it all. He's got this arrogance to him, and this man cannot take it. This formation had been designed with Ethan in mind. No one knew what path he used, but there were no reports of his ever using a striker technique. Most reports agreed that he used a path focused on enforcement, probably focused on the force aspect. He might have even trained with the Cloudhammer school, though he lacked their gold sign. Ethan's hair blew behind him in the wind generated by the force of the boundary formation. He faced Jai Daishou squarely until the Jai Patriarch was sure they were locking gazes. The Aurelius held the broom in one hand, pointing it toward one of the Jai elders. No, not to the elder, to the boundary flag. Whose idea was the boundary? Ethan asked, and though the words sounded distorted, Jai Daishou could hear them clearly. I knew you would need something to prevent you from running for your life, he said. Oh, did you? No, what he has done is he has this thing that basically does not allow Madra in. And so he thinks, oh good, I'll be able to attack you when you're helpless. You gross old man. And it says, as death approached, Jai Daishou found saving face in the eyes of his peers had less and less appeal. I love that line, because that is a thing that I think happens. The older people get, the more they're just like, oh, fuck it. I'm on my way out. What do I need to worry about my reputation for? Reputation is for somebody who's going to continue to need to use that currency, and I don't. So go to hell, everybody. I was like, oh, that fucking makes sense. Shit. He just thinks that the Jai clan's doomed once he dies anyway, because there's no Underlord to take his place. So either way, it doesn't matter, because the Jai clan's rep is just going to be immaterial in the end anyway. So he prepares this technique called the Star Lance. And Ethan says, thank you. Now there are no witnesses. A dull gray spark passed from the middle of the broom where Ethan gripped it, washing along to both ends. Soul fire, the signature of an Underlord. Where the blaze passed, and I like that too, signature of an Underlord. I didn't know that, but I mentioned when he gives some of that soul fire to the Sylvan that I was like, what is that? Where the blaze passed, the broom's color darkened, remade in the fires of condensed vital aura. It would conduct energy almost perfectly now, and would be tougher than steel. All the best weapons were imbued with the Lord's soul fire. And that was all within Jai Daishou's calculations, and it was still just a broom. Jai Daishou hesitated before launching his striker technique. Maybe Ethan Aurelius really was arrogant to the point of madness. The young Underlord had always seemed brash with the overconfidence of youth, but now... No, true gold was a match for an Underlord, certainly. Soulfire itself, and the process of weaving it from vital aura, gave lords powers that no gold could access. But it wasn't as though a true gold could do nothing. Where a lone wolf was only prey, a pack of wolves could bring down a tiger. Skilled as they were, these 6 true gold elders working together could bring Ethan down on their own. With Jai Daishou added in, Aurelius Underlord was already dead. He was just speaking out of pride, that was all. Just pride. And that is where that ends, guys. I was so mad. Andy, I was so mad at you personally. What is he gonna do? Oh my God, I am dying. I'm so glad that I get to cover the rest of this tomorrow. I was listening to it, and then we get to the end with Orthos like attacking and defending, and then the chapter ends, and I like triple checked the number of pages because I was like, no, I should be able to listen to the next episode. This was only 2 chapters. No, the math didn't work out. I had to stop. I was so annoyed. Oh, I was so annoyed. So yeah, so that's where we stop. But tomorrow I'm getting the next one. I'm super excited. So thank you, Andy, very much. This has been super fun to cover. And yeah, the next one is going to be the last for Blackflame, and then the next book is Skysworn. So we're getting into the next one. I'm super duper. I mean, this has just been such a fun series, and it's just yet another bit of evidence to me that there is so much out there that's just really excellent, that without there being enough people talking about it, you would not find it, you know? And I hope that my coverage of it inspires some people to read it, because I know that happens. People will see I'm covering something that they haven't heard of, and they're like, well, I'll read it, because I have some people now who like actively do not read things that I'm not personally covering because they really like the experience of like rehashing things afterwards. So fingers crossed that more people begin to read the series because of the coverage and just curiosity, you know. Anyway, okay, I'm going to go. Thank you again, Andy. I really have been having fun, and I will see you again tomorrow at 6 Central. And until then, toodaloo, motherfuckers.
That was an Unspoiled Network podcast.